So in today's gospel lesson, Matthew, the author of Matthew, does a great service. Because when he writes about the Nativity, he reminds us that there is more than one perspective to the event. Indeed, he makes it very clear when talking about pregnancy, as Mary was pregnant. He makes it clear that the pregnancy experience of the man is just as important as that of the woman. Now, sure, in the course of 9 months, the woman gets to suffer from nausea, sometimes for the whole 9 months, like my wife did. The woman gets to suffer from bloating and cramps, and she gets to endure all of the bodily changes that carrying a little person around inside of you wreaks on a mother. She gets to anticipate the experience of labor. And then at the end, she gets to experience the joy of expelling another human being from your body. But the man's role is just as important. He's got a lot to think about. 30 years ago, I watched a film strip in birth class. And it told me that the man has to keep track of breathing and contractions. The man has to be thinking about counting. He even has to tell her when to breathe and push, because apparently she wouldn't know otherwise. And anybody who's ever worked in a machine shop will appreciate this. He has to do all of this thinking and talking and everything in a very noisy environment. So telling the story from the man's perspective is important. Think about all the psychological stress that Joseph was under. He was having to figure out what to do with his now pregnant fiancée. And pregnant, incidentally, when he could be utterly and completely certain that he had nothing to do with it. Now, compared with all the angst and turmoil that he was going through, at least as far as Matthew was concerned, Mary had it easy. All she had to do was just wait for him to make his decision. Maybe women had it easier in those days. Or maybe not. Like any of the Gospels or any of the books of the Bible, Matthew is telling a story from one perspective. And there's a reason why he focuses first on the man, on Joseph. Not because he had the harder job to do by any means. But Matthew wanted to make sure that everybody knew, everybody who read this gospel would know that Jesus was descended from Joseph, and Joseph was a true son of Israel. That's why earlier in the Gospel of Matthew, he goes through 42 generations from Abraham to Joseph. Many of you can thank me for not including those verses. All 42. But Matthew wanted to do that because he wanted to prove that Jesus is the Messiah that they had been anticipating for generation after generation and century after century. That's why Matthew tells us in a formula, it's a formula as old as the Old Testament. He says Joseph was a righteous man. That's in verse 19. And if you think about it, we've heard that phrase many times before. And it's always used to mark somebody as righteous and appropriate for God to use in the furtherance of God's plans. The aspect of being righteous is even applied to Mary in another gospel. But in telling the story from Joseph's standpoint, Matthew is setting up tension. The tension of what this upright, righteous man is going to do in the face of what is evidently an unfaithful fiancé. And just when Joseph decides that he's going to do the merciful thing, which is to send Mary away, send her out of here, get rid of her, let her have the child somewhere else. And that's merciful because it's at least not subjecting her to being charged with adultery, which he could have done. But just when he makes that decision to put Mary away and move on with his life, an angel of the Lord appears to him in a dream and says, Joseph, you're going to want to hold on to it because you don't have all the information. Then the angel tells Joseph what's actually going on, and then in the end, of course, Joseph does the right thing. Now here's a good place to pause and say, why? Not why did Joseph do the right thing, but why did God wait to give Joseph that information? When you're making decisions, that would seem like a pretty critical piece to have. The Gospel of Luke tells us that an angel visited Mary before she ever got pregnant. She got a heads up. So why not warn Joseph the same way? Why was there no angelic messenger to fill him in on what was going on? That maybe could have cut out some of the shock and angst that Joseph experienced. And if I were writing this, I would say that maybe it was done to keep up the suspense. You've got to keep reading them, keep flipping the pages. What's Joseph going to do? But I don't think God created us to be his own personal reality show. God doesn't work by saying, hey, let's throw this at him and see what happens. I think maybe it had to do with free choice, free will. The thing we keep going back to. I think God wanted to make sure that he was choosing the right people for the job. Now, in Mary's case, you remember the angel Gabriel approached her and explained what the plan was. He told her that she was going to become pregnant by the Holy Spirit, that she would have a son, that he would be named Jesus, all of that. And after a little bit of hesitation, Mary said, all right, I'll do it. Sign me up. And so she became pregnant. And that makes me think that God respected her autonomy as a human being. So he wanted first to see how she would react before she became pregnant. He wanted to know if she was going to be on board. And when she told Gabriel that she was, then that showed God that he had indeed chosen a good and righteous mother for Jesus. But he still didn't know about the father. So I think it's then reasonable to guess that God kept Joseph in the dark until after he made his decision, because he wanted to know what that decision would be. And once Joseph made the decision to do the honorable and merciful and grace-filled thing, that showed God that Joseph would be a good father. That he would be a good role model for his son, and that he and Mary would be good parents. The kinds of parents he was looking for. So it would be okay to tell him. Now, I've often wondered over the last few years, as I've thought about this, I've wondered if Mary had said absolutely no, I will not do this. Or if Joseph had proven to be a vengeful, angry, sort of, jilted fiancé. I wonder if the honor and duty of being Jesus' parents would have fallen to somebody else. It's interesting to think that maybe there were others kind of in the wings that God would have fallen back on if this hadn't been the right too. Because surely they weren't the only righteous couple in Galilee. And that's speculation, but it's a fun rabbit hole to get into. But rather than chase speculation and alternative histories, I just want to touch on one more lesson from today's gospel. And it's one that's maybe not as obvious. Listen to your dreams. It would have been easy enough for Joseph to get up the morning after he had that dream. It would have been easy enough for him to get up and just swear off eating Domino's pizza after midnight. It would have been easy enough to just get up and write that thing off as an aberration and decide, I'm just going to go ahead, send Mary away, and be done with it. But he didn't do that. It would have been easy enough for Joseph to get up the next morning and dismiss his dream as just some unreasonable fantasy, and then to go on with his ordinary, uninspired life. But he didn't do that. Instead, Joseph trusted. Joseph knew that this dream was something special. He knew that sometimes the only way you can hear that still, small voice of God is when it comes to you in the middle of the night. When it comes without the noise and the busyness of the world. And it's easiest to hear. Joseph knew as a man of faith that sometimes God or God's messengers actually do speak to us. Because there's something special that we need to hear, or there's something special that we need to do. And as people of faith, as people of grace and mercy, as God's people, we're the ones that get those messages. And he knew to listen. Let's be honest. It's a lot more comfortable to believe that God doesn't talk to us. It's a lot more comfortable to believe that God only talks to, special people, to prophets, people like that. Because if we truly believe that God talks to everybody at some point in their lives, then the logical extension of that is that we need to be listening and paying attention. We need to be open to what God is saying. And that's scary. Because what God is usually saying when he speaks to us that way is that it's time for us to get out of our comfort zone. What God is usually doing is challenging us, calling us to do big things, dream big dreams. The truth is, the small ones are just so much more comfortable. We prefer those. So the lesson is, listen to your dreams. I have a dream. For me, it started a couple of months ago. I had the dream that maybe working with other churches and agencies in the area, maybe we could do something about the problem of homelessness out here in the county. In the city, they have the Salem Center, which is not a cure-all, but it's something. But out here in the county, it's a whole different situation. And I thought, maybe there's got to be something we could do. The more I learned about it, the more I heard, and the more I talked to people who actually knew something about the problem, the more overwhelming it seemed. The more it seems it's just too much. And I think about other times that God called people, stirred people to take action, to live out the biblical call to justice and mercy, and I hear that voice saying, listen to your dreams. up today. You're going to hear more about it in January with the letter and the newsletter. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I'm bringing it up. I think it's one of those dreams. And if it seems far afield to be talking about things like this during Advent, I suppose it is. Except that at its core, Advent is the story of God keeping God's promises and of God working through ordinary people of faith. And it's a time, it's a season that tells us that when we let the Spirit of God move within us, when we let the Spirit of God restore hope and faith and justice and mercy in the world, great things can happen. That's keeping a promise too. And we ought to remember that our promise as people of faith is to be the hands and feet of Christ. Our promise is to continue the redeeming work of Christmas.